discussion is Plato versus Aristotle, which is elementary enough. And we'll either do this in one class or two classes. That remains to be seen. So let's just take it that way and see what happens. So we'll cover the material either in one, like I say, either in one class, or we'll continue the same subject matter into the next class, which will be next Friday. But in any event, this Friday and next Friday will both be part of this class series on economics and philosophy. And then Nancy's class will pick up the weekend afterwards, or the Friday after that. So let me go back to a question that somebody asked in the course of the last class that we had on the issue of technology and population. And the question, as I recall, was along the lines of, well, I can see why the growth of technology is necessary and why population growth isn't a problem, but does population have to grow? Is it necessary to have population growth? Is there something in the economic development process per se that intrinsically requires population growth? And the answer, of course, to that is yes. Let me just elaborate on that a little bit by way of refreshing your memories as to the subjects that we were discussing and use that as a jumping off point for the topics I want to take up tonight with you. There are at least two reasons, but two basic reasons why it is absolutely necessary that population grow so that population density increases. Potential out of population density increases in a successful societal reproduction model. One reason for that, which I had mentioned last time, was the issue of needing a certain minimal necessary division of labor which increases as technology advances. In other words, if you have a very primitive hunting and gathering society, the division of labor is pretty minimal. You need maybe two people, a hunter and a gatherer, or someone who sharpens the sticks and the other guy who heaves them, or maybe a third person who, like the retriever dog, go fetch and brings the deer back or what have you. It does not take a huge division of labor. However, if you have a very sophisticated, high technology society where a large amount of effort goes into the development of labor-saving machinery, that is to say, heat power machinery, which requires itself a lot of different components and so on to make it function in the proper fashion, you clearly need a division of labor to produce all of the different elements to make that technology possible. So you have to have a certain absolute breadth of the population with necessary different types of skill levels, or different skills, specific skills, in order to be able to produce all of the different components, the many different things which make it possible for that level of technology to exist. So that's one reason that dictates of necessity that you have to have a growing population if you want technology to increase. But there's actually a more profound reason, which we touched on last time, but which gets us into the core of the topic under discussion today, which is that you must increase the density per capita per hectare. You must increase the density of creativity. You need more creativity per total population. You need more creativity in absolute terms. Now, where does creativity come from? It comes from individual, sovereign, creative acts. You want more creativity, besides making the existing people more creative by developing their understanding of technology and ability to think in a certain kind of way, which is what we'll get into momentarily. But you also need more people who are themselves each individually capable of engaging in fundamental scientific research, absorbing and assimilating technology, spreading technology throughout society, and so forth. Now, since the survival of the economy and economic survival depends on increasing S prime over C plus V, if you recall, we discussed this as the free energy ratio of the economy, that is to say, the ratio of the generation of free energy of the system to the necessary payment of existing energy of the system to keep things going. You want that ratio to be increasing, and that ultimately depends on the most rapid possible introduction of technological advances. So what you need to do is you have to have a situation where creativity must be deliberately fostered in a population, not just happen by happenstance or by hazard or by good luck or good fortune, but it must be deliberately fostered. And in that sense, the question of the intelligibility of creativity itself becomes the central issue of economic development, of successful economic development. How do you make the creative process itself intelligible? Or, let's take it back a step, is it intelligible? Maybe we shouldn't go so fast. Maybe it's not intelligible. Maybe it happens by inspiration. You know, the artist who sits back and all of a sudden has a big inspiration and all of a sudden gets very creative, but can't reproduce it. It's not intelligible. You can't explain where it comes from. It's sort of intuition. You get inspired. You don't know where it comes from. That's, of course, assuming that you even admit the existence of creativity at all, but let's assume that you do admit that. The issue of the intelligibility of creativity is fundamental to deliberately foster increasing creativity among increasing numbers of individually sovereign individuals. So that the question of education then becomes properly the central subject, in the sense that technologies must not only be created or discovered by an elite, but that those technologies must in terms be absorbed and assimilated and spread by an entire population throughout the pores of the economy. And remember, we discussed this was one of the big problems that Lynn has pointed out in the economy in the Soviet Union prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is that they had a certain amount of real significant excellence in science and in technology, but the ability of the productive labor force to absorb, assimilate that, and spread it was very, very poor because of the question of training of the labor force, education, and so on, and ultimately because of a cultural question of backwardness. And therefore the importance of Western civilization, Western Judeo-Christian civilization specifically, in developing the capabilities within the totality of the population to be able to do this. So this becomes, as you can see, this idea of imago Dei, or the individual being capable of godlike, that is to say, creative discovery, is not simply a moral question of, oh yes, every individual, morally speaking, we must say that every individual is made in the image of God. It is economically necessary to foster those conditions where that is the case, and to do so in a deliberate, willful way based on a knowledge of the intelligibility of that creative process. And more recently, Lynn has been really underscoring the distinction between an oligarchical system and a republican system, or the Commonwealth system as first being brought about by Louis XI in France, as one that overcame for the first time ever, in principle, the oligarchical problem that at best, under the best of circumstances, perhaps 5% of the population was educated and had such circumstances that they could engage in processes that could actually be called creative. 95% of the population lived in utter bestiality, brutality, and without the minimum necessary conditions to be able to participate, assimilate, and spread such technological breakthroughs throughout society. Obviously, if you have such a limitation where at best 5% is engaging in such kinds of creative activity, then clearly this limits the rate at which your economy can grow for precisely these reasons. If the ultimate motor of the economy is technology, and the motor of technology is fundamental scientific breakthroughs, creativity, then you're limiting yourself in this fashion. So we not only need to increase the population, but we need to increase the population of that distinctly human character which is godlike, that is to say, made in the living image of God, participating in the process of creativity, of discovery, of creation. Now, if you go at the thing this way, I think that you'll very much enjoy, and if you haven't read it yet, you should, read Lynn's latest document that was published in last Sunday's briefing, I believe, the one on Kenneth Arrow. How many people read that? How many people started reading it? Okay. You really should look at it. It's very good. It's a long document, so you might have left it for the right occasion to read and so on. The right occasion is now. It's really excellent. I think you'll find that it addresses many of the issues, and then some, but many of the issues that we've been discussing in the classes here. Plus, it goes at it from the whole standpoint of attacking the underlying epistemological, or the underpinnings, the epistemological underpinnings of the environmentalist argument or the environmentalist axiom of the existence of a supposed carrying capacity. Right, that the Earth or the biosphere has a certain carrying capacity, meaning it can only carry so much, it can only support so much, it can only bear so much on its thin shoulders. And beyond that, well, we certainly just can't develop any more than that, or the biosphere will not be able to maintain it. And Lynn counterattacks the underpinnings in this by going through his concept of economy, the idea of energy flux density, and so on, and also emphasizes a point which we only touched on, but I want to emphasize this because you should work this through in your own mind, is the idea of, well, what about the biosphere as a whole? Yes, okay, we can agree that the economy, human economy, necessarily is not entropic. That is to say, it does not follow an entropic model of winding down, but there's actually increasing generation of free energy relative to energy of the system. That is manifestly, demonstrably the case in a successful economy. But Lynn raises the question, well, what about the biosphere? We take the biosphere as a whole. That is to say, the surface of the Earth and the immediate atmosphere and living beings on it and so on and so forth. If we properly conceive of man as being part of that living, functioning biosphere, does it necessarily mean that we have to draw the conclusion that as man absorbs and uses more energy from that biosphere, that that necessarily depletes the amount available for other species? Is that true? Because that's the basic argument behind carrying capacity. And he throws out, which merits much deeper reflection, perhaps the biosphere itself is not an entropic system. Perhaps the biosphere itself displays precisely these characteristics of increasing generation of energy, free energy, relative to the energy of the system. An intriguing idea. And if the biosphere, why not the universe as a whole? How about that? And we'll come to what Leibniz says about that in the next couple of classes. But this, by way of reminding you and getting your intellectual juices flowing again in terms of some of the topics that we were discussing. Now, the issue here, the issue that's being raised is, again, how do you identify and deliberately foster and make intelligible creativity? Because without it, our economy is going to collapse. How do you do that? What is creativity? How do you know that something is true? How do you know what science is? What is knowledge? And in this regard, we must, of necessity, go back, turn to Plato for the very rudimentary epistemological breakthroughs in terms of approaching and dealing with this question. You've probably frequently read or heard about, in terms of Lynn's points of reference, in terms of Plato, of the issue of, can you close the door there, please? I think that would be helpful. The three levels, or the three approximations of knowledge, or of discovery of the truth that Plato discusses. The first being the level of hypothesis, the mind functioning at the level of hypothesis. Hypothesis formation is simply when you come up with an educated guess. Call hypothesis educated guess for first approximation. You come up with an idea, an overall picture of something that might or might not be the case, and you develop an experiment to produce results where you want to demonstrate the consistency of your results, or the consistency of what you're hypothesizing might be the case, with the existing axioms of the system under discussion, which we'll call System A. So what you're trying to do is set up a situation where you want to test to see if items X or Y or Z that you're looking into are actually consistent with the body of knowledge as now known, System A, and with its fundamental axioms. And if you have something that doesn't fit, if you have something that contradicts or A, then it's not true. That's your first approximation at the level of simple hypothesis. And then Lynn refers to Plato's discussion of the higher hypothesis, which is you are looking for an experiment which will challenge the very assumptions or the axioms in A. You want to do something which calls into question, which might show that the entire axiomatic structure of A is wrong, and therefore might force you to go to a higher level hypothesis, to a higher hypothesis than A, which encompasses and subsumes the knowledge or the information or the data available from the empirical world, which was previously explained by A, but the new element that you've discovered contradicts A and its basic axioms, and therefore you have to develop a new approach, a new theory, which encompasses previously demonstrated empirical knowledge plus the new anomalous information. And that's the higher hypothesis. Then there's the idea of the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, which is focusing on that method of creative discovery, the method which took you from A to B. What is the method of generating ever newer and higher hypotheses? The hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, which takes you to the level of looking at the process of discovery of knowledge, which leads to a series of A, B, C, D, E, etc., in which systems man has knowledge of the universe which is decreasingly imperfect. Right? You never have the full, complete answer for a variety of reasons. You never have the truth for a variety of reasons, among other things because the world's changing. But you don't have any absolute, universal absolute truth. What you have is decreasing imperfection with the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. And what Plato postulates, and we'll be coming back to this much more slowly and in parts to go through this, but I want to just sort of give you the big picture on this thing. What Plato discusses also then is that beyond this, what is above all of this, what is creating all of this, is a certain unhypothesized universal principle, which is beyond the realm or beyond the universe of the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. Now, Parmenides, let's briefly, I don't want to do this in any depth whatsoever, but briefly say a few things about the Parmenides, since I asked you to read it. Did anyone actually read through this? Did anyone start to read through it? You started a little bit.
I've read it in the past several times, but I didn't read it in the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
We read it, a few weeks ago.
Oh, okay. All right. Fine. That's good. You should read it. It merits repeated reading. What helps a whole lot, though, is to have a roadmap on this thing. And the roadmap in terms of the way Lynn has discussed this thing is in terms of the question of tragedy. In other words, what is Plato actually doing in the Parmenides? The key point in the Parmenides is that the argument of the Parmenides is premised on an early exclusion, very early on in the Parmenides dialogue. The Parmenides is divided basically into two parts: an introductory part where there's a discussion and a kind of setup of the battle that's about to occur, the massacre, the meat grinder that's about to occur, which rapidly includes the reader. You feel like you've gone through a meat grinder on this thing, and that's exactly what happens. Plato takes you through a meat grinder. But the setup on the thing, which is very brief, it's 5 or 6 pages, and then the meat grinder is the final 30 or 40 pages. But in the setup of the thing, you have your 4 principal characters, who are Parmenides, Zenon, Socrates, and Aristotle. And they're basically discussing, well, let's have a chat, let's discuss method, and so on and so forth. And early on in that discussion, what happens is that Plato has, the 4 of them, discuss things in such a fashion that Socrates finally says, okay, we're going to exclude change from consideration. We're going to exclude change. And then once that happens, what you're left with is a tragedy. You're left with a meat grinder. And this is exactly the kind of thing, as Lynn has described this in some of his recent writings, this is exactly what Don Quixote is, Cervantes is Don Quixote. This is exactly like Hamlet. The point here is, if you make a fundamental axiomatic mistake from the outset, what is the necessary tragic consequence of that unless you change those fundamental axioms? And the point at which that mistake is made or deliberately introduced by the playwright or the dialogue writer, in this case Plato, that is the point of the punctum saliens. That is the point after which there is no stopping the tragedy unless you alter the axioms altogether. So that's the way the whole thing is actually set up. Parmenides' line, his spiel, Parmenides' approach in this whole thing is he says reality, truth, reality is the one, the unitary, the one, the totality. Right? Zenon says, he's with Parmenides, he basically has the same point of view. He's younger, but he's got the same point of view. He says reality is not the many, the multiple, the many different things. Okay? Now that may sound like they're saying the same thing, and in one way they are, but in another way they're not. Socrates says, no, the reality lies in the forms. And here we run into a very big translation problem from the Greek, and we'll get into this a little bit more. What he means by forms, it's sometimes translated as ideas, or what I found to be a very useful translation. Again, I don't know Greek, so I don't know how loyal this is to the original. But one guy that I read translates this as archetype. The idea of a form is an archetype, arquetipo in Spanish. Right? And Socrates says, no, this is the solution to the problem. And so they start talking about all of this. And what happens at the very beginning is that Parmenides goes after Socrates. Aristotle's role in this whole thing, by the way, is that he's the one who asks the stupid questions. Right? This is very deliberate, because this is a mocking of the Aristotelian method. So what happens is they start going after Socrates, and Parmenides says, well, look, but the problem is that if you say that the truth lies in the forms or the ideas or the archetypes behind things or related to things, you're going to run into a very big problem, because then what you need is a specific form to explain each class of different things that you've got. You need it, and he says it this way. This is Parmenides. I think I know why you, speaking to Socrates, why you imagine these unitary forms exist. When you have decided that a number of individual things are large, you probably cast your eye over the lot of them, notice that they present one and the same distinctive character or pattern, and accordingly pronounce the large to be one thing. Socrates says, quite right. Not bad for a jerk. Quite right. Parmenides says, but now take the form largeness and particular large things. When you cast your minds over them in the same way, large things and the concept largeness, when you cast your mind's eye over them in the same way, surely you must likewise conceive the notion of a single large something by virtue of which they all seem large. Socrates says, granted. And Parmenides says, aha, so here we have another form of largeness, distinct both from largeness itself, the first largeness, and from all things which partake thereof. And yet another by virtue of which all these will be large, so that none of your forms will any longer be one, but an indefinite plurality. Okay, you see what he's done? Got a lot of specific items, the many. In this case, let's say they're all large. That's the characteristic that they have. That's their quality. So the form, says Parmenides, that Socrates or Plato is looking for, is the quality of largeness which they all share. Okay, so you have your quality of largeness and all these large specific things. And Parmenides says, aha, but once you do that, how about if you have your mind think about all the specific things which are large, your new form of largeness, and look at all of that together, and you've got a new form above it all which encompasses all of that, and so on ad infinitum. He doesn't continue with the thing, but he says, so you have an indefinite plurality. And Socrates says, well, you know what, Parmenides, you didn't get it. He says the following. He says, come, Parmenides, may not each of these forms be a thought? There's a novel idea. May not each of these forms be a thought properly located nowhere but in our minds? Looked at in this way, each of them would be one and exempt from the consequences to which you just referred. So Socrates is trying to get this guy, Parmenides, to get an idea of what he's talking about here. It's not largeness as a thing or as a quality which is then in relation to these things, but it's a thought, it's a mental object. Okay, that's his first approximation. And Parmenides rebuts him and goes back and forth, and he says, well, but the problem with this idea is that each of these things must then in turn be composed of thoughts. He says, well then, if other things participate in the forms, as you say they do, must you not admit that each of these things is composed of thoughts, and so they all think, or else they are thoughts but unthinking thoughts? At which point, you see, so what Parmenides is insistent on is this idea which anyone who took a class on Plato was taught this, right? That what Plato means by the forms is some abstract ideal thing which is a characteristic which you can abstract from all of the different specific objects that you're looking at. Greenness, largeness, what makes a chair, that it participates of chairness or chairhood or something like that. And that Plato supposedly has this idea of these forms. There's chairhood floating around up here, right? Isn't this how you got taught it? This is how I got taught it, right? And so the teachers adopt the position of Parmenides, which Plato is attacking. So not only are we being taught something incorrect with regard to Plato, we're being taught that Plato thinks precisely what he's attacking. The idea is not that you have these forms of chairhood or blueness or largeness floating around that somehow are the characteristic of all the things underneath in the material world. Plato says, no, you've got to think of this as a thought. Then Parmenides comes back with his nonsense, and Socrates finally says, well, that too is devoid sense. Here is the view which most appears to me. And this is where he introduces, or certainly one of the points where he introduces the idea of, okay, fine, Parmenides, let's exclude change. And he says, here is the view which most appeals to me. These forms may be described as fixed patterns in nature. Other things resemble them, i.e. are copies of them, and the so-called participation of those things in forms is nothing else but resemblance to the forms. Okay? He says, fine, let's go at it your way, Parmenides. Let's talk about this as merely resemblance to the form, fixed patterns of nature. Okay, once that happens, forget it. You're into the meat grinder. And Parmenides and Zeno take the reader and take everyone there through this whole thing. And basically what Parmenides then concludes is he quickly jumps to the conclusion. He says, aha, if that is the case, then you cannot know what these forms are because they are not of this world. The only thing that you can know are the specific material, physical objects which you can perceive. But there is no way that you can know the forms which are fixed patterns in nature. And he says it in the following terms. This is all in the first 5 or 10 pages. He says, we have no access to the forms themselves, which cannot possibly belong to our world. Okay? Therefore, the form of beauty, of good, and so forth are unknowable for us. Okay? So Parmenides is saying that the one, a form, a universal concept beyond particular things, is unknowable. And once that is your starting point of the whole thing, then you get into your meat grinder. And what happens is that Parmenides generates his famous 8 antinomies and develops each of them out. And you know, if you go through this and think that this is what Plato believes, you can really drive yourself crazy. The first antinomy, if the one is, i.e., if all that exists is a single undifferentiated unity, we can assert nothing about it. Okay? That's the first antinomy. And what Parmenides demonstrates in the first antinomy, that statement which I just read is both true and false. And he demonstrates it with absolutely rigorous Aristotelian logic. And it is both true and false in that form. That's antinomy number 1. Antinomy number 2. Ready? If the one is, i.e. if there is unity which is something real, we can both affirm and deny all kinds of predicates of it. Okay? And that's the second antinomy. The third antinomy. If the one is, i.e. if there is unity which is something real, all kinds of predicates can be both affirmed and denied of the many. The last one was of the one. Now this is of the many. You can affirm and deny all kinds of predicates of the many. Next antinomy. If the one is, i.e. if all that exists is an undifferentiated unity, nothing can be either affirmed or denied of the many. And this is proven. Antinomy number 5. If the one is not, see all the previous ones we had the one is. Now if the one is not, i.e. if all that exists is not an undifferentiated unity, it is susceptible of all kinds of affirmation and denial. Ready for number 6? Is, if the one is not, i.e. if there is no unity whatever in things, nothing can be either affirmed or denied of it. And that is demonstrably the case if you start by excluding change. 7th, don't worry, there's only 8. If the one is not, i.e. if all that exists is not an undifferentiated unity, we can make many assertions about the apparent character of the many. And then the 8th antinomy is, and this is the summary, if the one is not, i.e. if there is no unity whatever in things, the many cannot appear to be one nor even a plurality of ones, and we can assert nothing at all about them. And then the concluding remarks from Parmenides after all of this is, putting it in a nutshell then, it would be correct to say that if the one is not, there is nothing at all. Whether the one is or is not, both the one and the many are and also are not, appear and do not appear to be all manner of things in relation both to themselves and to one another. And Aristotle's concluding line is, you are perfectly right. Now, what's the point of this? The point of this, as Lynn says, is what's excluded. The point of this is a proof by exhaustion, not only exhaustion of the reader, but by exhaustion of the argument. If you exhaust all of the possibilities, it's a kind of reductio ad absurdum. If you exhaust all of the possibilities and prove the absurdity, all premised on your original exclusion of change, what are you saying? You're trying to force the reader to say, aha, maybe that was our mistake. What is the concept then? What have we excluded? Where was our mistake? Where did Hamlet go wrong? Let's go back and think about this. How could it have been different? What's the fundamental tragic flaw? And that's exactly the sense in which the Parmenides is a tragedy. It's a negative proof by exhaustion. The positive concept presented directly in positive form is actually laid out much more directly in the Republic, which is why I asked you to read that, especially in the 6th and 7th books. And also, this whole question of the quadrature of the circle in Plato is, in Cusa, is another way of going about exactly this issue. And I'll come to the Cusa question momentarily, but let's first just take a step back from the specific discussion of the Parmenides and go at this basic question of the existence of the one and the many. There's some debate, by the way, of how this should properly be translated into Spanish. We have generally translated this in our publication as lo uno y los muchos, which I think is the correct translation. We've been doing it this way since Common Sense. But many of the philosophical books in Spanish translate as lo uno y lo múltiple. All right? This poses some interesting questions about exactly what is meant by the many. The problem is that in English, the article the is both singular and plural. It can be either. Right? You can say the book, or you can say the books. The doesn't tell you anything, but in most so-called Latin languages, your article has got to reflect both the gender, whether masculine or feminine, but also singular or plural. In other words, if you want to say the book, in Spanish, you have to say el libro. But if you're talking about more than one, it's los libros. So the article tells you whether you're talking singular or plural. In English, the article the is indistinct. You have to know what is meant by this. Does the concept the many mean that which is multiple and many? Or does it refer to the many different manys? I'll leave that for those of you interested in translation to ponder about. But this is really a very important question, because what Parmenides and Socrates are debating here. What Parmenides says is, well, look, you can't know anything that is general and universal about the things which you perceive. The only thing that you can know are the specific objects of your perception. And this is a very commonplace view in empiricism more generally. Right? The only thing you know is that which you perceive. And the real question here is, where does a concept of unity come from? How do you get an idea of a single unified whole, whatever, whether very large and very grandiose, or a very small but nonetheless unified concept of something which is unified, which is one thing, a little universe? How do you establish unity both spatially and temporally, given our perceptual apparatus, given our senses, given that we operate on the basis of our senses? Let's use sight, because that's the most important one. How do you know that an object exists? Say by looking at it. How do you know this is a magic marker, right? Everyone will agree this is a magic marker, right? How do you know that this is a magic marker? What makes it an object? What holds it together? What gives it cohesion? Leibniz discusses this thing later and says, well, if you have an atomic or a materialist view or an empiricist view of the universe, what in the world holds each of the little particles to each other? Is it hooks? And do you then have hooks on hooks and hooks that somehow bind this together? What is it? What is it that holds it together into one thing? Is this infinitely divisible? Or look at it from the simple standpoint of perception. I hold this up, right? And I say, okay, this is a magic marker. Well, we'll put it right here on the piano. Or we'll hold it up to make it easier for the video camera. Right? Okay. Do you want to disagree with that, Charlie? Would you agree that this is a magic marker? I mean,
seems to be one.
Very careful answer. Very, very careful answer. It seems to be one. Okay. Appearances are that this is, sure, because I could be projecting a hologram here and all the rest of it, but you know, I mean, I wrote on the board with it, right? So unless this is really tricky, well, but why? What gives you the right to conclude from your sense perceptions of this particular object that this is a magic marker? I mean, what are you perceiving after all? Well, you're perceiving a bunch of black little dots of perception on your retina, which in turn is being sent by electrical waves to your brain, presumably, unless you got more advanced equipment than I do. But that's the basic idea, supposedly, right? All these little black perceptions, there's a certain form. On this side, there's no longer black. You get the dark blue or whatever color that is of that background. And then here you have some white, and then all of a sudden it becomes gray. There's a little bit of faded yellow. Well, what in the world holds it all together? What allows you to distinguish and say, no, this black is different from that blue? How come you're not saying that's one combined object? What is it about your sensual or your sense perceptive apparatus in itself that allows you to take parts of what you're perceiving and say, no, that's an object? Even a simple object. I mean, this isn't complicated. This isn't the concept of negentropy or justice or beauty. This is just a ridiculous magic marker. Where does that power and authority come from in your mind to say that is an object as distinguished out from the entire, everything else that I'm perceiving? Because you're getting millions of perceptions, aren't you? I mean, a virtually unlimited, certainly uncountable, individual sense perceptions are coming in to your perceptual apparatus. All right? Or think about John Cavici. Okay? He doesn't have sight, but same thing in terms of hearing. How can John distinguish a voice? Have you ever noticed? John's really good at that, obviously, because he's developed that particular sensory apparatus. How? It's the same problem. There are actually 3 trillion different noises going on in this room. How does one, from all of that, form a unity, a one, and say, oh no, that is such and such's voice? I know that voice. Little things like that. It's the same question. It applies to all of the senses. But sight is the most easy to make the general argument on. Well, so what does give you that right? This is not only for Charlie, anybody else. I mean, because I can argue that it ain't so. It's not. You can't prove to me that this is a magic marker. Where does that come from?
I think part of it has to do with experience.
What way?
Because, well, I mean, apparently a newborn child cannot make a distinction between separate objects in its field of perception. It takes a while to actually develop the concept of even the separateness of their own body from surrounding objects.
That's true, but what is that power of separation and distinction that is being developed in the child? If what you know is premised only on what you experience and what you see or hear or what your perceptual apparatus gives you, your sensory impressions, if that's the only thing that you know, then how can you know anything which is other than a complete smattering of all of those different perceptions? What gives it unity? What gives it form? Where does that come from? It's true what you're saying about the child, but what is that power? Where does it come from? What is it about the mind that allows it to form unified conceptions with a certain amount of certainty about it? I mean, I think all of us here will, in reality, admit that they're pretty darn sure that this is a magic marker. But where does that come from? Why? How do you perceive that? When you look at another person, how do you distinguish between foreground and background? What is it about your mind that distinguishes, you know, the blur of Tony's shirt from the wall? How do I know that's a shirt? How do I know he's not wearing the wall? He may be off the wall.
Well, you know, we do have a certain amount of depth perception, which is dependent upon having a part of depth perception is dependent upon having two eyes. Rather than one, you lose a certain amount of depth perception when you only have one eye.
Sure, that's true, but that still doesn't explain how you form unified
How do you
concepts.
conceive of depth perception? How can you conceive of the concept of depth perception?
Well, I think I understand what the question is, but I'm just trying to drive it more to the point.
Well, let me ask.
I'm not trying to sabotage.
No. This is. It's important to think this stuff through seriously. Let me ask the question that Heraclitus asked, which is, he said, you can't step in the same river twice. Okay. Well, is that true or is that not true?
It is.
You cannot step in the same river twice, because when you step in it at one moment, what is that river? Well, it's a certain amount of water running in this way, it's a certain number of stones, pebbles, trees, this, that, and the other. That's the river. If you step in it a second later, everything has changed. Nothing is the same. Absolutely nothing. There is no particular item or sense perception of every single one which you perceived a moment before which is the same. And yet you will say with a certain amount of confidence that you stepped in the same river twice. Won't you? How can you say that, though? It isn't the same river. What is it that makes it the same? Everything is changing. Change is clearly primary. There's something about the process of change which is primary. But if you are a strict empiricist, if you're a strict Aristotelian, if all knowledge and information comes only from what you perceive or experience, and this experience thing, it's really overblown, it's overrated. It's not specifically experience. Because you can know and be certain of certain things that you've never had any experience with whatsoever. Like this famous example that Lynn gives of Eratosthenes. He did not ever see or have any experience with the idea of the curvature of the earth, but he knew it existed. All right? But again, let's take it back to even more simple things. Can you step in the same river twice? Is it the same river? Or is it not the same river? And very clearly, evidently, it's not the same river. So what gives you the right to say that it is? All right, that's from the standpoint of spatial unity. Now let's look at it from the standpoint of temporal unity, time, things that change through time. Let's go to a very basic question. How do you say I? What gives you the right to say I, yo? What is the identity? Is there such a thing as an I, a person? The second you say that, everything has changed. Every single atom, every single particle inside you has changed. Every single thought, the temperature of every molecule has changed. Everything is altered from the second you said I to the next second. Nothing is the same. But how can you say that it's the same person? How can you talk about yourself? Can you talk about yourself? Maybe we should agree with the existentialists that there is no such thing as I, that there is no identity. What is it that remains continuous?
Change.
But what aspect of change?
Quizás, maybe every people out of the mismo,
Same.
same naturaleza.
Dilo en español si quieres.
O sea, todos somos de la misma naturaleza, pero es diferente sustancialidad, ¿no?
¿Diferente qué?
Sustancialidad, o sea, se refería a la individualidad, ¿no? O sea, todos somos de la misma naturaleza, es lo que determina la igualdad, ¿no? Pero también entra a jugar la individualidad del ser, ¿no? Que eso es lo que nos hace
Pero es que
diferentes.
What is-
la
what-
individualidad te va a durar más de 2 segundos.
What he's saying is that all men are made in the same nature, but we each have our individual substantiality. People are different. But that's not the point. I'm talking about you, one person. How can you say I, meaning yourself, Alex, say that at 1 p.m., and how can you say I at 2 p.m. and be referring to the same person? Are you the same person?
No.
What's constant throughout change? Is there anything constant throughout change? You say no?
Yes, I do.
Who does?
I do.
Who?
Got me there.
For a moment I thought I knew what you were saying, but then I didn't know who you were, so. So. Now, this is interesting because obviously people change in little ways and big ways, but you know that it's the same person. There's something that's continuous. There's something that's the same. What is it? That's the point. That's the question here. Yeah.
Well, I think the flow of the answer is, I mean, as long as you're just stuck on change, anything can happen in change. I think the answer is probably somewhere in this concept of not entropy, that the universe is not developing. Change can be, even entropy is also change. You can put a super balls in a box and bounce them around, and they're changing, but they're not doing anything. There's no cohesion. But when you introduce a not entropic process into your concept of change, then you've got a possibility or a parameter in there for entities.
Yeah. That starts to get at the point. But let me pose it a slightly different way to make sure that the idea is clear. We're discussing the issue of the one and the many. Right? We're trying to come up with a solution or toss around this idea that's posed in the Parmenides. Before we get to Plato's solution to this in the Republic, we're doing some exercise with the issue posed in the Parmenides. That's what we're doing. The idea of the one and the many. And if you simply take it in a simplistic way, and these are the many, there are a bunch of individual objects or perceptions. What is it that allows you to say, oh, this is a one? Right? How come that and how come not something else? Do such ones exist? Any unified concepts? And this is, obviously they do. But what is the relationship of that one to the many? Is it that the many participate in a certain form of oneness? Or is there something else going on? How does the human mind work on this thing? For example, let me just give you an example from elementary, even sense perception. We're not talking about higher qualities of mental activity. Even simple sense perception absolutely does not function the way Parmenides and Aristotle say. If you, this is well documented, if you do a test of perception and you show someone three boxes of different shades of gray. This could be a light gray, this will be a darker gray, and this will be a darker still gray. Okay? And you show him this. And you say, this is A, B, and C. Okay? And you say, okay, I want you to remember that color B. Okay? And then you take this away, and what you do is you take this exact box and put it here. Put this one here. And then you add another one here, which is a darker still, slightly darker. See what we're doing here? So you told the person, okay, remember the color gray. And then you show him these three, and you say, pick out that color. Which do you think he picks? The middle one. That's right. He does not pick this one, which is, in fact, the exact color. He will tend, of course, if they're very widely different, if it's white, gray, and black, there's no problem. But there's a certain very interesting thing that happens even with perception, let alone higher thoughts, just perception, which is that what the human mind distinguishes is not objects in themselves, but relationships. What the human mind perceives is a relationship of grays. And it will tend to pick out that same relationship the next time around. That's how the mind works. It does not perceive specific sense impressions of individual objects. By its nature, it forms unified wholes. It forms relationships. Or I'll give you another example of the same kind of thing. Look at how the human mind works. Let's take an example from not even human beings. Let's take some monkeys, right, to show you how this would, it's obvious that it works with human beings all the more so. Take a bunch of monkeys, 2 monkeys, put them in a room, hang a bunch of bananas from the ceiling, out of reach. Okay? The monkey can't reach. Put a chair in this corner and a broomstick in the other corner. Okay, what's going to happen? First thing that's going to happen is that the monkey is going to stand under the bananas and start jumping up and down to try to grab the bananas. Okay? That's the first thing that he's going to do. Why? He's hungry, wants the bananas. That's not going to work. He'll get the idea sooner or later that that's not going to work. Right? Now, this will not work with someone who's part of the Gingrich movement because they'll never figure it out. But with monkeys, it'll work. So what's he going to do? Okay, well, probably what he's going to do is he'll see the stick and he'll grab the stick, but you've cut it to a length that he can't actually reach the bananas just by swinging the stick at the thing. Right? So he's going to try to figure out a way to do that. At a certain point, what's going to happen is he's going to take 3 completely disparate elements that are absolutely not connected in sense perception, that are absolutely not connected in his experience. And what this monkey's going to do is he's going to drag the stool or the chair over, he's going to stand on it, he's going to grab the pole, and he's going to whack the hell out of those bananas to get them down. That's what he's going to do. This is, it's sort of obvious. So what's going on here? I mean, draw the parallel in terms of the way the human mind works. Has nothing to do with sense perception. It has nothing to do with the existing relationship among objects. There is clearly a capacity for generation of unity, of a single concept, out of things that are not thus organized. The light bulb goes off in your head. You say, oh, I know. You got an idea, a solution to a problem. Right? You're tinkering with your car, same kind of thing. Something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. Oh, it's that. And maybe you're wrong, but you try it, and so on. You get another idea. That light bulb, in the comic strips, what's drawn always is the light bulb going off back here. Right. That's extremely interesting. That's where you know that this whole idea of sense perception and empiricism and Aristotelianism is complete nonsense. Now, the way the human mind works is it does not have a sense of the physical universe based upon visual or other perception. That's not how it works. It is not true that what we perceive, for example, is simple linear Euclidean space-time, which is continuous as Lynn describes it, right? Forward and backward, sideways, up and down, and in time. Simple linear continuity. That's not even what we perceive. This is an imposition of our imagination, of our visual imagination, on the evidence that comes in. It's an organization of that material in a certain form. And the only issue is not whether you do that or not. Your mind does do that. It is necessarily subjective. There is no such thing as a purely objective, i.e. something that doesn't involve your own mind in considering something. And the only question is whether that visual imagination, which you impose as an ordering principle upon the empirical evidence coming into your sensory apparatus, the only question is whether that visual imagination generates a unity which is true or impossible or incorrect. And science is therefore, by definition, of necessity, totally subjective. Anyone who tells you we got to get away from subjective science, get the human element out of this, and go to straight, hard facts is, by definition, epistemologically completely off base. Science is subjective and, of necessity, postulates the unseen. It poses that which unifies but is not visible. Now, how does this work? Well, let's take this from a different angle. Let's briefly go through, this is all to get into Plato in the proper fashion. Let's briefly take up Cousé's treatment of the question of the quadrature of the circle. The question of the quadrature of the circle was historically posed in a very simple, straightforward way, which is, can you construct a polygon which is equal in area to that circle? Right? Can you actually do that? A polygon is a figure made up of straight, equal length, straight edges with vertices, angles, and so on. And obviously, your first approximation might be to build a square which comes close to the area of the circle, other than these four chunks here, right? So it's an approximation. It's a first approximation. So then you could obviously get the idea of, well, let's get a little bit closer still. And instead of building a square with 4 sides, let's double it. Let's make it 8 sides. And so we'll divide each arc in 2 this way. And then we'll construct our next polygon, which is going to be an octagon, right? In that fashion. And that really gets us a lot closer. That's almost exactly the area of a circle, almost. But it's not quite, because you now have this area, which is a different one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and so on, right? And if you double it again and you go to 16 sides, you can see that you're going to be almost filling out the circle. And if you go to 32 and 64 and 128 and so on, you're going to be generating a polygon which is really, really close to the circle. And the difference has almost no dimension whatsoever. Virtually null dimensional difference between the polygon and the circle. The point that Cousé makes is that, first of all, you can never get there, because the closer you get, the further you are away from the actual nature of the circle. What is the nature of the circle? The nature of the circle is that it is a geometric shape with 0 vertices, no points. Constant curvature. Right? Whereas the more sides to the polygon you put on this, the more vertices, the more occasions in which you're going to be changing direction. So the further you get, the more you go in this direction, the further you're getting away from the circle in terms of its actual nature. You're actually developing something which is less and less and less circle-like, because it's got more and more and more vertices on this thing. And what you've got then is a situation where you clearly have the circle as that which bounds the polygon of n sides, or as many sides as you care to generate. And it bounds it on the outside with a difference which is virtually zero-dimensional. There's almost no difference. But it is that almost no difference which is the crucial species distinction between your polygon and a circle. Species distinction in the sense that they're two different animals. They ain't the same thing. You don't get one from the other. And the point that Cousin makes is that you have to make a leap from this method of generating polygons of more and more and more and more sides. You have to make a leap to an entirely new concept of circular rotation, of single unitary action. You have to develop the concept of a unity. You have to go over from more and more and more and more predicates, or more and more manys, to a single unitary concept, what Leibniz later calls a monad, and that is the circle, this principle of rotation. Now, if you go at it from the standpoint of this infinite series of multiple-sided polygons, that, through the method of exhaustion, actually takes you to the concept of the necessary existence of the circle. You can't generate a circle from the polygons, but if you properly think about the process of generating an infinite series of polygons, that proves negatively the necessary existence of the circle. Necessary existent. That's a very crucial phrase in terms of epistemology. In other words, you may not be able to generate it directly from what you have, but you can demonstrate its necessary existence, that it necessarily must exist. And that's a perfectly adequate form of proof. What Cousin says is that is a perfect proof of the existence of God. Because what you have to do is you have to go from, he says, from the visible, that which we see, that which is visible, to the idea of the invisible attributes of God. That is to say, those things which God possesses as attributes, but which are not visible, but which you can think of, which is a higher level concept than the merely visible. And from there, you have to jump to the concept of God as a necessary existent. And this is the famous part of Deducta Ignorantia on this question of the quadrature of the circle, which Lynn so repeatedly refers to as the foundation block of all modern science. And it really is very straightforward. I'll read you the paragraph. Chapter 3, Learned Ignorance. Chapter 3, the precise truth is incomprehensible. Okay, he says, punch him. All right, he says, it is not the case that by means of likenesses, a finite intellect, think of the polygon, a finite intellect can precisely attain the truth about things. For truth is not something more or something less, but is something indivisible. Whatever is not truth cannot measure truth precisely. By comparison, a non-circle cannot measure a circle, whose being is something indivisible. Hence, the intellect, which is not truth, never comprehends truth so precisely that truth cannot be comprehended infinitely more precisely. For the intellect is to truth as an inscribed polygon is to the inscribing circle. The more angles the inscribed polygon has, the more similar it is to the circle. However, even if the number of its angles is increased ad infinitum, the polygon never becomes equal to the circle unless it is resolved into an identity with the circle. Hence, regarding truth, it is evident that we do not know anything other than the following: that we know truth not to be precisely comprehensible as it is. For truth may be likened unto the most absolute necessity, which cannot be either something more or something less than it is, and our intellect may be likened unto possibility. Therefore, the quiddity of things, which is the truth of beings, is unattainable in its purity. Though it is sought by all philosophers, it is found by no one as it is. And the more deeply we are instructed in this ignorance, the closer we approach the truth. Right? That is the famous section of De Docta Ignorantia where Cusa goes through the issue of the quadrature of the circle. It was an absolutely stunning breakthrough for that time, because he is saying this is of a different order, a different species than any infinite polygon, and that this is the precise relationship between God and that knowledge of the created universe which man is capable of knowing. It's a different thing. You have to make the leap to the concept of unity. And this is one of his fundamental proofs of the existence of God. Okay. Now, Plato. Plato is way before Cusa. Cusa is steeped in Plato. Cusa's breakthroughs and discoveries are premised on his in-depth knowledge of Plato. How does Plato go at this question? Plato's discussion of truth and knowledge and how you come to know things is discussed in some detail in the Republic in Book 6, which you all read, right? In the course of reading the whole Republic. Right? So, people read Book 6? How many people read Book 6? Started to read Book 6? Okay, maybe half. All right. You really got to read this stuff, because you got to take yourself through it. You got to take yourself through this mental activity and generate the concept for yourself, for reasons which are inherent to Plato's argument itself. He says, okay, the way we know things is by hypothesis. He says we're going to reach knowledge by a process of hypothesis and destruction of hypotheses, getting to ever higher levels of hypotheses. And I'm going to just read you a few parts of this as we go along so you get a sense of his argument. He says, okay, our method proceeds alone by this way, demolishing the hypotheses as it goes, back to the very beginning itself in order to find firm ground. The soul's eye, which is really buried deep in a sort of barbaric bog, it draws out quietly and leaps upward, having the arts we have described as handmaids and helpers. These we have often termed sciences from habit, but they need another name, one clearer than opinion and dimmer than science. In other words, this method of hypothesis is not opinion. It's better than opinion, but it's not science. He says, so let's stop calling it science. We have defined it already somewhere as understanding. Okay? So this idea of hypothesis generation, destruction of hypotheses to move on to newer ones, that's what he's calling understanding. And he says this is the way that you ultimately proceed to reach an understanding of the good, because the question that's proposed here to be answered is, what is the good? And in the beginning of this whole discussion, in this section, Socrates is having a discussion, I guess, with, I don't know, who is it, Glaucon? Yeah, with Glaucon. And Glaucon says, well, what is the good? Come on, Socrates, tell me what the story is. What's the good? And Socrates says, well, I don't know. I'm not sure I want to try to answer that. Let us pass by the question of what the good is just for the present. I fear my present impulse is not strong enough to carry me as far as what I think on that subject now. But there is an interesting offspring of the good. There's an interesting offspring of the good, as it seems to me, and very like it. I'm willing to speak of that. So Glaucon says, tell me about the good. He says, no way. I'm going to tell you about the offspring, something which the good has created. And it's very much like the good. And that's going to help us get to an understanding of the good. Okay. And then he says, look, the way you need to think about this, Glaucon, is by metaphors. I want you to think of this using the idea, think of the metaphor of a sun. That the good is a little bit like the sun. That the sun is to the world of vision and things seen as the good is to the world of things thought. Que el sol es para el mundo de lo visible y la visión lo mismo que el bien es para el mundo de las ideas y del pensamiento. Think in terms of those parallels, he tells them. And he then goes into a famous section which is called the divided line. In terms of Plato's theory of knowledge. And what he says is the following. He says, okay, I'm actually going to draw this for you and then read you by steps what Plato says about this. And if you have questions, you should ask as we go along on this thing, because it's worth working through this thing. He says, okay, let's do it this way. Let's talk about two worlds, the way we're going to understand the good. If this is the good, think of the sun. And the sun is to the world of vision as the good is to the world of thought. Okay? Now, what are we dealing with here in this world, the world of vision? Well, we're dealing with the visible world of things that can be seen, of that which is material, that which is constantly changing, and that which is apparent to the senses. That's what the world of the visible actually is. Whereas in the world of of thoughts, of thinking, we're talking not about a visible world. It's not things that you see, but it's the intelligible world. It's the world of existences known to thought, not to vision. But that you think them, and therefore you know of their existence. This is the world of substance, of substances, and the world of the forms. And we're going to get beyond this, because we should call this really Plato's ideas or archetypes. Now, again, remember what Plato's doing here. He's trying to get us to generate for ourselves a concept of the good. And to do that, he's saying, well, think of it as that which illuminates the world of thought the same way the sun illuminates the world of vision. That's how you need to think of this thing. And now that we've reached that point, I'll read you what he said. He said, what the good affects by its influence in the region of the mind towards mind and things thought, this the sun affects in the region of seeing towards sight and things seen. Okay, that's pretty clear. And he says, then that which provides their truth to the things known and gives the power of knowing to the knower, you must say is the idea or principle of the good. And you must conceive it as being the cause of understanding and of truth insofar as known. And thus, while knowledge and truth as we know them are both beautiful, you will be right in thinking that it is something different, something still more beautiful than these, that the good is something different and still more beautiful than these. As for knowledge and truth, just as we said before, that it was right to consider light and sight to be sun-like, but wrong to think them to be the sun, so here it is right to consider both these, knowledge and truth, to be good-like, but wrong to think either of them to be the good. The eternal nature of the good must be allowed a yet higher value. Okay? You with me? See what he's doing on this thing? He's saying, as the sun is to the world of vision, that light and sight are sun-like, it's not the same as the sun. The sun is of a totally different quality. If you get that idea, that metaphorical relationship, then you can start thinking about knowledge and truth as being very good. They're very important, they're very good, but their reality is given to them by something of a higher order, which is the good. Similarity with things known, you will agree, that the good is not only the cause of their becoming known, but the cause that knowledge exists and of the state of knowledge. Although the good is not itself a state of knowledge, but something transcending far beyond it in dignity and power. Okay? It is not itself a state of knowledge. It transcends it in dignity and power. Keep in mind Parmenides' stupid rebuttal to what Socrates was saying about the forms or the ideas. He said, oh, well, that's floating around in space, and then you have to have a category to it. He says, this is not the same thing. It is transcending it in dignity and power. Okay. Lo que está diciendo,
Acerca de Parménides,
sí, lo que está diciendo Platón es que el bien transciende el conocimiento y la verdad, pero lo supera en cuanto a dignidad y honor. Es otra cosa, es otro animal, es otra especie. No es parte de la misma serie, es otra cosa superior. Now, okay, then the next idea that Plato develops here is, he says, okay, we're trying to get to an idea of what the good is. Let's look in a little more detail at each of these worlds. Let's take a divided line. Let's take the world, the visible world, right? The world of vision. And let's realize that this, in turn, is divided into two kinds of perceptions. We have what he calls images, and then we have actual material objects. Remember what we were discussing about the magic marker, right? We have images, and he says these are things like shadows. You don't even know if something exists. It's just a shadow. Una sombra. It's a shadow. However, and that's in the world of the visible, right? You see shadows. You don't know what's there. You don't know what it is. Right? You ever seen that children's game where you have a light and you hold up your hand and you make like a dog or a whatever? Okay, what do you see? Well, you see the shadow. What is it? Well, who knows? It's in the visible world, but its reality is far inferior to the actual material objects. Vamos a llegar a la caverna. He's asking about the cave parable. I said, hold your horses, we'll get there. Okay, so what are material objects? Well, this is material objects. A tree, a rock. Plato says these things exist. And this is in the world of the visible. He says, okay, there is a parallel, there's a similar situation if we look at the world, the intelligible world, the world of the intellect, the world of thought. Because on the first level, you have mental objects or thoughts, plain old thoughts, such as, for example, what would be a mental object? It's not a physical object, but it's a mental object which your mind creates. Well, for example, let's talk about a cube, right? Or a sphere. It's a geometrical mental object. It's a mental construct. It's not a specific cube. It's the idea of a cube. But it's very clearly perceptible, right? It's intelligible to you. And then, at a higher level, you have ideas, or forms, or archetypes. For example, the idea, he says, of justice, or the idea of beauty. It's not the beauty of a specific thing. The beauty of a specific thing is itself a mental object. But the idea of beauty itself is a higher order. You're talking about something which is beyond a specific beautiful object. But when I say beauty, we all have some idea of what that means. It's a mental construct which is accessible to the human mind. It may be interpreted differently. We may have different sense of what that actually means. But it's not a lunatic idea to say the concept beauty or the concept justice. And Plato says this is in the higher level of the intelligible world. And then he says, okay, what is the quality of human knowledge or human human knowledge in each of these areas. In this area, what you're talking about is pure opinion. Anyone's opinion is equally good. You perceive a shadow, my perception versus your perception, pure opinion. All right? Slightly higher is what he calls knowledge. Not science, but knowledge. Knowledge of specific things, of specific material objects. You're not seeing only the shadows anymore, but you're actually perceiving the material object itself. That's knowledge. Here, we're dealing, when you talk about a mental object, you are already talking about the level which he calls understanding, which itself is premised on rationality, the use of the rational mind. Right? You're forming a unified concept. You're forming a conception, an understanding of a mental object, of a thought. But that is not science. Science is restricted to this area here where actual reason as opposed to rationality, but reason and creativity prevail. And remember, he's trying to get us where we're going. Keep in mind what the objective is. He's trying to force us to generate for ourselves a concept of the good as the ultimate goal of knowledge, of the good. Now, and that's where he's going at. So he's drawing a parallel, a metaphor. To understand that, think of this. Think of the relationship. Think of the sun. Think of the good. Okay, and that's what he says about this. Now I'll read you a few quotes where he actually goes through exactly this. He says, okay, conceive then that there are these two, as we say, these two divisions. The one reigns over the region and things of the mind, the other over those of the eye. Not to say the sky, or you will think I am playing on the word. Now then, you have these two ideas distinct, seen and thought. Okay, clear? No problem. And Glaucon also says, I have seen this. Okay. So he says, suppose you take a line. Suppose you take a line, cut into two unequal parts. Right? This is unequal. It's not divided necessarily in half. Cut into two unequal parts to represent, in proportion, the worlds of things seen and things thought. And then cut each part in the same proportion. Your two parts in the world of things seen, that's over here, will differ in degree of clearness and dimness. Clearness and dimness. And one part will contain images. By images I mean, first of all, shadows. Then reflections in water and in surfaces which are of close texture, smooth and shiny, and everything of that kind, if you understand. And Glaucon says, oh yes, I understand. Okay, take the second part of this for the things which the images resemble. The animals about us, and all trees and plants, and all kinds of manufactured articles. Very good, said Glaucon. Stop me if you're not with me. All right? So far, so good? Would you be willing to admit, said Socrates, that in respect of truth and untruth, there is the same distinction between the opinable, the opinion, and the knowable, as there is between the image and its model? Oh, yes, certainly, Glaucon answered. Now then, consider how the section for things thought should be divided. He says, okay, we got that down. Now let's talk about this, how things thought should be seen. He said, this way we should do it. In the first part, the soul, in its search, is compelled to use as images the things imitated, the realities of the former part, and from things taken for granted, passes not to a new beginning, a first principle, but to an end, a conclusion. In the second part, it passes from an assumption to a first principle free from assumption, without the help of images which the other part uses. This part uses images, this part doesn't. It goes to a principle free of assumption. And it makes the path of enquiry amongst ideals themselves by means of them alone.
I
Confused? Glaucon says, I don't quite understand that. And Socrates says, let us try again. You will understand easier when I have said some more first. So, okay. What's he really saying? What did that mean? Okay, let's take it again. Let's do it over again with Plato, as he continues doing. He says, okay, what we're dealing with here is, he says, the difficulty came up for Glaucon and for some of us here at the point where he said, okay, now let's think of this, but apply that method of thinking to this world, the world of intelligible thought. Okay, that's where it started to get complicated. Okay, what do you do? He says, what you do is you take as your object of thought what you generate from here. The highest level you reach from here, you take that as what he calls the first class of intelligible, meaning capable of being perceived through thought, of intelligible things. Okay? So the subject matter, the raw material you're dealing with here, is what comes out of this level. And that becomes your first class of intelligible things. And on the basis of that, you develop a thought, a mental object, right? A thought object of what this might actually be all about. You develop a hypothesis. Hypothesis A. And then you work on that, and your mind then develops a higher hypothesis, hypothesis B. All of that's in this area here of the understanding. And then another one, and so forth and so on, hypothesis C. So you're developing a hypothesis and a higher hypothesis. This process, he says, then becomes the raw material which you take as your raw material for what he calls the second class of intelligible things. In other words, you're taking this process of hypothesis generation as your primary datum about which to think in this new level. In other words, you are going to be studying the process of hypothesis generation and of higher hypothesis generation. In other words, the subject matter here is the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. Take a look way back here. This here, there's no hypothesis here whatsoever. There's nothing. There's just sense perception. Hey, I see a shadow. What's your opinion? I don't know. I think it's a shadow. People have views and opinions. There's no hypothesis. There's no effort to explain what is happening or why. Hypothesis enters here at the point where you have to talk about causality. What is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is an educated guess as to why things are happening. It's an answer to the question why. If you don't ask the question why, you don't need a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an explanation of that which is causal. You got all of this other junk going on. If you don't care what's causing it or why it's happening, or what is the one which is creating the many, you don't need a hypothesis. You need a hypothesis at the point where you say, hey, wait a minute, what the hell is causing all of this that's going on around here? And the second you ask that question, you are forcing yourself to make a leap and come up with a concept of a one, which is not some form floating up in outer space above these manys of chairhood or chairness or something like that. You're trying to come up with a one which is a causal action which is producing the many. It's a different animal. It's a different species. It's totally different to think of something which causes things to happen versus the effects. They're not commensurable. They're not the same thing. They're not part of the same set. One is cause, the other is effect. And the one, the concept of the one, which Plato is beginning to develop, is that hypothesis which generates a causal explanation of the many which are perceived. That's a good first approximation. Yeah, question?
So where on this schema am I situated when I answer your question, what is this? And you're holding up the magic marker, and I answer magic marker.
It's an object.
That's the simple.
If you got some guy who's on dope,
Right.
right? And you say, what's this? He says, hey man, wow, I don't know. Far out. That's groovy. I don't know. It's all a kaleidoscope. Right? What's the purpose of drugs? How does drugs work? How does marijuana work, especially? Heroin, that's a whole different. What does marijuana do? Marijuana builds an unbridgeable gap right there. All you see is a kaleidoscope, period. That's it. It's all pure sense perception. Incoherent, disconnected. In fact, you're deliberately breaking down the mind's existing gestalts, the mind's existing formation of things known, of unities known, even simple objects. Right? And you see this with people who are on marijuana all over the place, right? You know, they're completely spaced out. Why? Because their mind does not form unified conceptions. Everything is a kaleidoscope. It's all colors, it's all images, it's all shadows, it's all opinions. And smoking marijuana, doing this, is a deliberate attempt to reduce the cognitive powers of mind to the most primitive form which Plato discusses. It's a deliberate shattering and destruction of the ordering which mind has imposed upon both the visible and the intelligible world. Puts it all in a new light, doesn't it?
O sea que la parte, tú me traduces, por favor. O sea que la parte de la izquierda, de las imágenes y el mundo perceptible, material, es a lo que Lin se refiere con lo que solamente la concepción que se le está metiendo a la humanidad en este momento es de los sentidos, de la cintura para abajo, ¿no? O sea, sí parte de ese principio.
Right. He's saying, so what this visible world is what Lin is talking about with the bombardment that humanity is being subjected to at this point, about seeing only the visible world and being bombarded with their pleasures of the moment and their identity being below their belt and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's exactly right. Nothing of a higher order, nothing of the intelligible world, nothing of thought. Here, these are shadows and images. These are the existence of material objects. But there's no hypothesis. There's no causality. There's no cause-effect relationship. That only begins here. That gets introduced here. But this is not science. Science requires thinking on the higher level of the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. That is to say, on the level of that methodology which continuously generates new hypotheses which are accurate in their reflection of universal archetypes. Now, let's listen to Plato say it. He says it a lot better than I just did, believe me. But after Glaucon had said, I don't quite understand that, and Plato said, relax, we'll try again. You will understand easier when I've said some more first. Then he comes back, he said, okay, the soul, as I said, because the soul is the knowing process here, right? That which knows. Soul is the subject of all this. The soul, as I said, is compelled to use assumptions in its search for this. It does not pass to a first principle because of being unable to get out clear above the assumptions, but uses as images the very things which are represented by those below. Uses as images, this first class of intelligible things, as if they were images, the very things which are represented by those below, and were esteemed and honored as bright compared with those. Right? This, when people got to here, they thought that was really good. This is bright compared to this, which is very dim. And he says, well, they take this and use this as the images to be used. Glaucon says, I understand that you speak of what belongs to geometry and its kindred arts. Now then understand, Socrates says, that by the other part of things thought, I mean what the arguing process itself grasps by power of dialectic, treating assumptions not as beginnings, but as literally hypotheses. That is to say, steps and springboards for assault, from which it may push its way up to the region free of assumptions and reach the beginning of all and grasp it, clinging again and again to whatever clings to this, and so may come down to a conclusion without using the help of anything at all that belongs to the senses, but only ideals themselves. And passing through ideals, it may end in ideals. In other words, it can then come back and reconceptualize everything, but without the help of anything at all that belongs to the senses. You're no longer dependent on any of this, but working strictly in the idea of mental objects, of ideals. And that's what he says about this stage of the thing. Now, he comes back to this in a different way further, but there's one additional point that needs to be made on this, which is that this is not the end, this is not the good, remember? There's something else going on. For Plato, this part here, this whole area here, is the universe of the becoming. That which Cantor describes as the realm of the transfinite. We'll get back to Cantor later, but just so that you have in your mind that parallel. This is the realm of the transfinite. Beyond that, beyond the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, beyond all of that which can be known by the individual soul, by man, lies what Plato describes as the unhypothesized principle. And that is the realm of the good, the absolute good, or what Cantor later calls the absolute infinite. Not the transfinite, but the absolute infinite. If you want the circle and the polygons. God. Many different ways to think about it. The unchanging, unhypothesized principle whose relationship to the process of becoming, that is to say, to the mental process of hypothesizing the higher hypothesis, is of the same metaphoric sort as the relationship of the sun is to the world of the visible. And what you're searching for in all of this always is that one which is the cause of the many. That unitary, not thing, but process, because everything changes, that unified, unitary, conceptualizable, intelligible process, which is the causal origin of the many which we perceive. Now, let's wrap it up with the cave parable, because I think that this really, well, because that's how Plato does it in the Republic. This should leave you at this point with a certain uneasy kind of an idea on the tip of your tongue. Sort of, you've almost got it, but how do you say it? How do you nail it down? Don't worry about it. It's not the sort of thing that you can drive a nail through. Where you want it is on the tip of your tongue, sort of just behind your conscious ability to express. It's like the light bulb that goes on. And Plato says, okay, this comes in Book 7 of the Republic. He says, okay, Glaucon, let me tell you what I'm talking about. This comes after the divided line. Let me tell you how this really works. He says, look, have all of you heard about the cave parable? You know generally what I'm talking about? Okay. Let's read it together, just not the whole thing, a few paragraphs. Because I think it's very clear if you just read what Plato has to say. He says, imagine mankind as dwelling in an underground cave with a long entrance open to the light across the whole width of the cave. In this they have been from childhood, with necks and legs fettered in chains, encadenados, so they have to stay where they are. They cannot move their heads round because of the fetters, and they can only look forward. But light comes to them from fire burning behind them higher up at a distance. Between the fire and the prisoners is a road above their level, and along it, imagine a low wall has been built, as puppet showmen have screens in front of their people over which they work their puppets. Okay? In other words, you're the prisoners, you're in the cave, you're chained, you can't move, and you got to look forward only. Right? And there's the wall of the cave, the blackboard or the eraser board or whatever. And what Plato says is that behind the prisoners, there's a fire way back. Right? And between the fire and the prisoners, there's a walkway. You know, just imagine a walkway that people and things and so on walk along. Okay.
Aparte de las imágenes, hay algo que está intermedio entre la...
Sí, lo que está diciendo es que hay los presos
sí, los
encadenados, la proyección, hay un fuego más atrás,
sí,
y entre el fuego y los presos
hay que,
está como un pasillo, sobre un andén sobre el que caminan. Ahorita vamos a ver quién camina sobre eso y qué es lo que pasa. Okay, fine, so far so good. See then bearers carrying along this wall back there all sorts of articles which they hold projecting above the wall. Statues of men and other living things made of stone or wood and all kinds of stuff. Some of the bearers speaking and some silent, as you might expect. All right? Suppose the prisoners were able to talk together. Don't you think that when they named the shadows which they saw passing, they would believe they were naming things? Right? In other words, you have these things being moved back there. The fire at the back of the cave is projecting the images of those objects, those material objects, onto the wall of the cave. And the prisoners, who from birth have been chained like this, have seen nothing else, and they see that and they hear voices. And he said, wouldn't they believe that they were naming things that they saw passing by? Then, if their prison had an echo from the opposite wall, whenever one of the passing bearers uttered a sound, would they not suppose that the passing shadow must be making the sound? Don't you think so? If so, such persons would certainly believe that there were no realities except those shadows of handmade things. And then Plato says, now consider what their release would be like and their cure from these fetters and their folly. Then he goes on to say, okay, so that's all that they're perceiving. Then he says, well, Glaucon, he says, the world of our sight is like the habitation in prison. The firelight there to the sunlight here, the ascent in the view of the upper world is the rising of the soul into the world of mind. Put it so, and you will not be far from my own surmise, since that is what you want to hear. But God knows if it is really true. At least what appears to me is that in the world of the known, last of all is the idea of the good, and with what toil to be seen. In other words, the very last thing you can think of in the world of the known is the idea of the good. But it takes a lot of toil to be seeing that. And seen, this must be inferred to be the cause of all right and beautiful things for all, which gives birth to light and the king of light in the world of sight. And in the world of mind, herself the queen produces truth and reason. And she must be seen by one who is to act with reason publicly or privately. Okay, now, so he's connected this idea of the cave with this search for truth, for knowledge, search for the good. And what he's describing is he's saying that what people perceive is simply the projections onto two dimensions of something which is occurring in a totally different reality, a totally different manifold of higher dimensionality. But all they ever see is that. That's all they perceive. That's the only visible world. And therefore, if you want to find out what is actually causing those shadows to be playing on here, what is actually causing that, you have to ascend to a higher level of knowledge. And he describes leaving the cave as similar to this process of ascent of knowledge, where you gain an understanding of the higher order reality which is projecting onto the visible world that which we then perceive. Now this issue of projection is really crucial. You can think of it in simple terms of projecting as with a light and a shadow and so on and so forth. But you also have to think of it metaphorically. You have to think of this in a much more fundamental way. Projection in the sense of we will never, as human beings, free ourselves of our perceptual apparatus. Okay? There's no way. You don't get outside your own skin. There is no way to perceive the world or to know it other than through your own mind. There is no possible way of having an objective bank of information or data outside of our process of perceiving it. Forget it. There's no way. All you can know is what you perceive, but also what your mind, through this process of hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, can generate as mental constructs or mental objects of that reality which must exist, which is a necessary existent, and which is projecting onto our sensual perceptive apparatus what we see in the discrete manifold. In other words, what you always have to ask yourself is, what is the higher order reality which is causing the projections which I'm seeing? What you perceive is what you perceive. But the question is not what do I perceive, the question is what is the one which is producing the many? Not the one in the sense of chairhood floating up above the objects, but the one in the sense of a causal process which is creating the appearances of the many. That is the question that you have to ask yourself, and that is the issue of projection. What is the generating principle of a series of specific items? What is the causal one of the visible many? Therefore, true knowledge, knowledge of what the actual nature of physical space-time is intelligible, but you can never name it specifically. It is only knowable by metaphor. It can only be known by recreating that idea in someone else's mind. As Lynn always says, ideas do not exist among individuals. They exist within individuals. Las ideas no existen entre los individuos. Las ideas existen dentro del individuo. And the best you can do is reproduce that idea and get another person to recreate it within his or her own sovereign mental process. That's how you communicate an idea. You don't say, here's the idea. Okay, thank you very much. You owe me $2. That's not ideas. It can't be done. That information, sure. Data, computer bits, sure. But ideas, no, by definition. And you've got to think of this idea, this question of projection, again, as this idea of that which causes, or the single unified concept which explains even an infinite series. For example, and I'll conclude on this so that you have more of an idea of this than you might think you have. Okay, that's an infinite series, right? Unending. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, blah, blah. Infinite series. It's the many. How many? Many. All right? Okay, what's the one? How do you say in one concept or one idea that which generates this whole thing? How do you create this? Give me a rule for it. Give me an archetype. Give me an idea which is a one which generates this many. Plus one. Adding one, sure. It's a unitary idea. Plus one. And that's going to give it to you. And you don't have to sit here and draw, keep writing till you're 900 years old. You've done it. It's all over. +1. Thank you very much. See you later. I always get this one wrong. So. Okay, there's another simple example. That's infinite, right? We can go on forever. What's the one of this many? One, 4, 9, 16, 25. Come on, guys. Square. X squared. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. Squared. That's it. Your job's done. All right. A single point or a single statement or a single concept which encompasses infinity, an infinite, potential bad infinite or endless infinite of expressions. I'll give you another example. What does the word justice evoke in your mind? Justice, the concept justice, is a 1. Because what it actually generates is an infinite series of different expressions or manifestations of that quality of justice, which we call justice. But the idea justice is perfectly accessible to the human mind. Or another example, which was used, in a major way in the Renaissance, in perspective. How do you put infinity, the point at infinity, onto a single point on a picture? The railroad tracks that go off into the distance? It's known as the vanishing point. It's a single point. It is a specific concrete unity, a point. But it's the point at infinity.
You kind of lost me with the concept of justice, because this is more of a non-object. There's sort of a leap between counting numbers and square numbers and justice.
Okay,
I never
let's
really clearly understood what the nature of that leap is.
Let's take another example. What if I say to you the word cube or sphere or circle? Well, I say circle. What does that mean? Am I talking about a specific circle? When I say circle, I'm immediately identifying and encompassing an absolute infinity of specific geometrical constructions. Circles. How many circles when I say circle? Well, there's an infinite number of them. What is the concept which generates all of them? What is the one which generates the many? The concept circle.
But the difference is, though, that when you're talking about a circle or a cube, is that I can actually construct one which, in most cases, will invoke that metaphor which is recreated in the mind of the person that sees it. But when I'm talking about justice, how do you do that? How do you actually represent that? How do you pass that on metaphorically to another person?
How do you pass on the concept? How do you pass on the idea of a circle?
Draw one.
No, that doesn't do it.
It's enough to provoke you can provoke the metaphor by using a visual object. Whereas when you're talking about justice or virtue or the good or something of that nature, how do you actually provoke that metaphor? What's the method?
Okay, let's try another one. Love. Have you ever seen Fidelio or listened to Fidelio? The opera? The opera by Beethoven. Not the magazine, but for which it was named, but the opera.
Only Verdi's opera. That's the only ones I have shown.
It's Verdi. Okay, well you should show him Beethoven because Beethoven's better.
That's all I want.
Verdi's good, but
I see it.
Okay.
Okay, so.
But,
so
okay.
Okay, that helps. We're talking about a poem. You read somebody a poem or
So what you're,
work of art.
what you're communicating through, for example, Fidelio, is a concept of love. Because what you see there is the case of Leonora, who acts on the basis of that emotion in order to free her husband.
So really what you're saying is that you use a work of art to...
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Every good idea is a work of art, or it's not a good idea, including mathematical formulas. I mean, it's got to be artistic in the sense that it communicates that which you cannot name. It's precisely that which is unnameable, which is not specific, which does not have a label which you can put on it. Because what you're talking about is an active verbal concept which creates specific expressions of the thing. So you can name all the specific expressions, but that's not what you want the person to understand. You want them to get an idea of the unifying concept. So that's what you communicate always through metaphor. What does that mean through metaphor? By juxtaposing or placing in his consideration or her consideration in his consciousness elements in such a fashion that it forces that person to recreate inside his or her mind the concept that you're looking for them to create. Like this idea of the circle and the polygons. You want a proof of the existence of God? You want to know what God is? Try to construct a circle out of polygons, and you'll get the point. Now, how can you know the existence of God? Do you know God directly? Do you go up and say, how you doing? Pleased to meet you. Do you have a sub yet? No, that's not how you know God. You know God differently. You know God the same way that you know of the necessary existence of a circle by generating polygons. It is a necessary existence. How does that concept come into your mind? It's not something that someone can communicate to you by a number of examples. You have to recreate that in your own mind. Yeah?
The difference that I see here is that when I say circle, you know, Tom can picture one in his mind instantly. Right? And I have we can reasonably be certain that both of us have the same picture in our mind. Maybe I have one smaller, maybe he has one larger, but it's the same idea. But when you say justice, you don't have the certainty that the same picture that he has, or whatever he has in mind of what justice is, may not be the same that I have. But using circles, trying to square the circle, you can get to the point where you know, well, I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it exists because I'm getting closer to it, and that's the difference between, circles and saying, circle or saying justice.
Yeah, but on the one hand...
You may not know what justice is, but you know it exists.
And it's an intelligible concept. All you're saying is that it's more difficult, but it's an intelligible concept. Yes, of course, there is a qualitative difference, as Plato points out. There is a qualitative difference between simple mental objects, the idea of a cube or a circle or something like that, and actual ideas, archetypes, those things which generate an endless series of specific mental objects. You're going from the many to the one. It is different. It is different. But in this case, what has given you the ability to create that mental object in your mind is a capacity which is precisely what's required to jump from the level of simple hypothesis formation to the idea of, in other words, it's not in the same string. It's not part of the same set of A, B, C, D, E, and F. You're not saying this is yet just another hypothesis. It's not just another geometrical figure. You're having to make a leap to the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. In other words, to look at that capacity which is generating the mental objects below it. So sure, it requires a higher level of abstraction. But it's that process of generation of concepts which is what's characteristic of the human mind. And this process of development of concepts is absolutely intelligible and communicable. And communicable. And you can, in fact, develop a rigorous concept of justice, a rigorous concept of beauty, just as we've developed a rigorous concept of economic value. Economic value is the same kind of thing. When I say economic value, what does that mean? I mean, this is like saying, well, you know, if you say kilowatt of energy, that's more tangible and understandable, and we can agree on that. But it's much harder to come to an agreement on something more abstract like economic value. Right? I'm saying it's the other way around. Only by actually understanding the higher order concept, the one, economic value, can you determine whether that kilowatt of energy is actually valuable or not. Same thing with a circle. You will agree that we've generated and developed a fairly rigorous proof of what economic value is, right? And when we came into the class, there probably would have been a million different points of view and opinions on that. What's economic value? Well, you know, what does it cost in the marketplace? Can you sell it? Is it good for you? Can you eat it? You know, labor theory of value. I mean, there were, right? But I think that we've all more or less come to an understanding that we have developed a rigorous definition of economic value.
On one hand, you're talking about this concept of change, that the only constant in the universe is change. And then on the other hand, you're saying you can have a rigorous definition of a particular concept. Isn't that contradictory? In other words, can't our idea of justice, our concept, our definition of justice always change and improve to get more and more like this hypothetical principle, this good, absolute infinite that you have over here?
What do you think?
Well, I think yes.
Our understanding changes.
What you're saying is, can you have knowledge of something that changes? Discussion is Plato versus Aristotle, which is elementary enough. And we'll either do this in one class or two classes. That remains to be seen. So let's just take it that way and see what happens. So we'll cover the material either in one, like I say, either in one class, or we'll continue the same subject matter into the next class, which will be next Friday. But in any event, this Friday and next Friday will both be part of this class series on economics and philosophy. And then Nancy's class will pick up the weekend afterwards, or the Friday after that. So let me go back to a question that somebody asked in the course of the last class that we had on the issue of technology and population. And the question, as I recall, was along the lines of, well, I can see why the growth of technology is necessary and why population growth isn't a problem, but does population have to grow? Is it necessary to have population growth? Is there something in the economic development process per se that intrinsically requires population growth? And the answer, of course, to that is yes. Let me just elaborate on that a little bit by way of refreshing your memories as to the subjects that we were discussing and use that as a jumping off point for the topics I want to take up tonight with you. There are at least two reasons, but two basic reasons why it is absolutely necessary that population grow so that population density increases. Potential out of population density increases in a successful societal reproduction model. One reason for that, which I had mentioned last time, was the issue of needing a certain minimal necessary division of labor which increases as technology advances. In other words, if you have a very primitive hunting and gathering society, the division of labor is pretty minimal. You need maybe two people, a hunter and a gatherer, or someone who sharpens the sticks and the other guy who heaves them, or maybe a third person who, like the retriever dog, go fetch and brings the deer back, or what have you. It does not take a huge division of labor. However, if you have a very sophisticated, high technology society where a large amount of effort goes into the development of labor-saving machinery, that is to say, heat power machinery, which requires itself a lot of different components and so on to make it function in the proper fashion, you clearly need a division of labor to produce all of the different elements to make that technology possible. So you have to have a certain absolute breadth of the population with necessary different types of skill levels, or different skills, specific skills, in order to be able to produce all of the different components, the many different things which make it possible for that level of technology to exist. So that's one reason that dictates of necessity that you have to have a growing population if you want technology to increase. But there's actually a more profound reason, which we touched on last time, but which gets us into the core of the topic under discussion today, which is that you must increase the density per capita per hectare. You must increase the density of creativity. You need more creativity per total population. You need more creativity in absolute terms. Now, where does creativity come from? It comes from individual, sovereign, creative acts. You want more creativity, besides making the existing people more creative by developing their understanding of technology and ability to think in a certain kind of way, which is what we'll get into momentarily. But you also need more people who are themselves each individually capable of engaging in fundamental scientific research, absorbing and assimilating technology, spreading technology throughout society, and so forth. Now, since the survival of the economy and economic survival depends on increasing S prime over C plus V, if you recall, we discussed this as the free energy ratio of the economy, that is to say, the ratio of the generation of free energy of the system to the necessary payment of existing energy of the system to keep things going. You want that ratio to be increasing, and that ultimately depends on the most rapid possible introduction of technological advances. So what you need to do is you have to have a situation where creativity must be deliberately fostered in a population, not just happen by happenstance or by hazard or by good luck or good fortune, but it must be deliberately fostered. And in that sense, the question of the intelligibility of creativity itself becomes the central issue of economic development, of successful economic development. How do you make the creative process itself intelligible? Or, let's take it back a step, is it intelligible? Maybe we shouldn't go so fast. Maybe it's not intelligible. Maybe it happens by inspiration. The artist who sits back and all of a sudden has a big inspiration and all of a sudden gets very creative, but can't reproduce it. It's not intelligible. You can't explain where it comes from. It's sort of intuition. You get inspired. You don't know where it comes from. That's, of course, assuming that you even admit the existence of creativity at all, but let's assume that you do admit that. The issue of the intelligibility of creativity is fundamental to deliberately foster increasing creativity among increasing numbers of individually sovereign individuals. So that the question of education then becomes properly the central subject, in the sense that technologies must not only be created or discovered by an elite, but that those technologies must in terms be absorbed and assimilated and spread by an entire population throughout the pores of the economy. And remember, we discussed this was one of the big problems that Lynn has pointed out in the economy in the Soviet Union prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is that they had a certain amount of real significant excellence in science and in technology, but the ability of the productive labor force to absorb, assimilate that, and spread it was very, very poor because of the question of training of the labor force, education, and so on, and ultimately because of a cultural question of backwardness. And therefore the importance of Western civilization, Western Judeo-Christian civilization specifically, in developing the capabilities within the totality of the population to be able to do this. So this becomes, as you can see, this idea of imago Dei, or the individual being capable of godlike, that is to say, creative discovery, is not simply a moral question of, oh yes, every individual, morally speaking, we must say that every individual is made in the image of God. It is economically necessary to foster those conditions where that is the case, and to do so in a deliberate, willful way based on a knowledge of the intelligibility of that creative process. And more recently, Lynn has been really underscoring the distinction between an oligarchical system and a republican system, or the Commonwealth system as first being brought about by Louis XI in France, as one that overcame for the first time ever, in principle, the oligarchical problem that at best, under the best of circumstances, perhaps 5% of the population was educated and had such circumstances that they could engage in processes that could actually be called creative. 95% of the population lived in utter bestiality, brutality, and without the minimum necessary conditions to be able to participate, assimilate, and spread such technological breakthroughs throughout society. Obviously, if you have such a limitation where at best 5% is engaging in such kinds of creative activity, then clearly this limits the rate at which your economy can grow for precisely these reasons. If the ultimate motor of the economy is technology, and the motor of technology is fundamental scientific breakthroughs, creativity, then you're limiting yourself in this fashion. So we not only need to increase the population, but we need to increase the population of that distinctly human character which is godlike, that is to say, made in the living image of God, participating in the process of creativity, of discovery, of creation. Now, if you go at the thing this way, I think that you'll very much enjoy, and if you haven't read it yet, you should, read Lynn's latest document that was published in last Sunday's briefing, I believe, the one on Kenneth Arrow. How many people read that? How many people started reading it? Okay. You really should look at it. It's very good. It's a long document, so you might have left it for the right occasion to read and so on. The right occasion is now. It's really excellent. I think you'll find that it addresses many of the issues, and then some, but many of the issues that we've been discussing in the classes here. Plus, it goes at it from the whole standpoint of attacking the underlying epistemological, or the underpinnings, the epistemological underpinnings of the environmentalist argument, or the environmentalist axiom of the existence of a supposed carrying capacity. Right, that the Earth or the biosphere has a certain carrying capacity, meaning it can only carry so much, it can only support so much, it can only bear so much on its thin shoulders. And beyond that, well, we certainly just can't develop any more than that, or the biosphere will not be able to maintain it. And Lynn counterattacks the underpinnings in this by going through his concept of economy, the idea of energy flux density, and so on, and also emphasizes a point which we only touched on, but I want to emphasize this because you should work this through in your own mind, is the idea of, well, what about the biosphere as a whole? Yes, okay, we can agree that the economy, human economy, necessarily is not entropic. That is to say, it does not follow an entropic model of winding down, but there's actually increasing generation of free energy relative to energy of the system. That is manifestly, demonstrably the case in a successful economy. But Lynn raises the question, well, what about the biosphere? We take the biosphere as a whole. That is to say, the surface of the Earth and the immediate atmosphere and living beings on it and so on and so forth. If we properly conceive of man as being part of that living, functioning biosphere, does it necessarily mean that we have to draw the conclusion that as man absorbs and uses more energy from that biosphere, that that necessarily depletes the amount available for other species? Is that true? Because that's the basic argument behind carrying capacity. And he throws out, which merits much deeper reflection, perhaps the biosphere itself is not an entropic system. Perhaps the biosphere itself displays precisely these characteristics of increasing generation of energy, free energy, relative to the energy of the system. An intriguing idea. And if the biosphere, why not the universe as a whole? How about that? And we'll come to what Leibniz says about that in the next couple of classes. But this, by way of reminding you and getting your intellectual juices flowing again in terms of some of the topics that we were discussing. Now, the issue here, the issue that's being raised is, again, how do you identify and deliberately foster and make intelligible creativity? Because without it, our economy is going to collapse. How do you do that? What is creativity? How do you know that something is true? How do you know what science is? What is knowledge? And in this regard, we must, of necessity, go back, turn to Plato for the very rudimentary epistemological breakthroughs in terms of approaching and dealing with this question. You've probably frequently read or heard about, in terms of Lynn's points of reference, in terms of Plato, of the issue of, can you close the door there, please? I think that would be helpful. The three levels, or the three approximations of knowledge, or of discovery of the truth that Plato discusses. The first being the level of hypothesis, the mind functioning at the level of hypothesis. Hypothesis formation is simply when you come up with an educated guess. Call hypothesis educated guess for first approximation. You come up with an idea, an overall picture of something that might or might not be the case, and you develop an experiment to produce results where you want to demonstrate the consistency of your results, or the consistency of what you're hypothesizing might be the case, with the existing axioms of the system under discussion, which we'll call System A. So what you're trying to do is set up a situation where you want to test to see if items X or Y or Z that you're looking into are actually consistent with the body of knowledge as now known, System A, and with its fundamental axioms. And if you have something that doesn't fit, if you have something that contradicts or A, then it's not true. That's your first approximation at the level of simple hypothesis. And then Lynn refers to Plato's discussion of the higher hypothesis, which is you are looking for an experiment which will challenge the very assumptions or the axioms in A. You want to do something which calls into question, which might show that the entire axiomatic structure of A is wrong, and therefore might force you to go to a higher level hypothesis, to a higher hypothesis than A, which encompasses and subsumes the knowledge or the information or the data available from the empirical world, which was previously explained by A, but the new element that you've discovered contradicts A and its basic axioms, and therefore you have to develop a new approach, a new theory, which encompasses previously demonstrated empirical knowledge plus the new anomalous information. And that's the higher hypothesis. Then there's the idea of the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, which is focusing on that method of creative discovery, the method which took you from A to B. What is the method of generating ever newer and higher hypotheses? The hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, which takes you to the level of looking at the process of discovery of knowledge, which leads to a series of A, B, C, D, E, etc., in which systems man has knowledge of the universe which is decreasingly imperfect. Right? You never have the full, complete answer for a variety of reasons. You never have the truth for a variety of reasons, among other things because the world's changing. But you don't have any absolute, universal absolute truth. What you have is decreasing imperfection with the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. And what Plato postulates, and we'll be coming back to this much more slowly and in parts to go through this, but I want to just sort of give you the big picture on this thing. What Plato discusses also then is that beyond this, what is above all of this, what is creating all of this, is a certain unhypothesized universal principle, which is beyond the realm or beyond the universe of the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis. Now, Parmenides, let's briefly, I don't want to do this in any depth whatsoever, but briefly say a few things about the Parmenides, since I asked you to read it. Did anyone actually read through this? Did anyone start to read through it? You started a little bit.
I've read it in the past several
Yeah,
times, but I didn't read it in the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
We read it
Oh, okay. All right. Fine. That's good. You should read it. It merits repeated reading. What helps a whole lot, though, is to have a roadmap on this thing. And the roadmap in terms of the way Lynn has discussed this thing is in terms of the question of tragedy. In other words, what is Plato actually doing in the Parmenides? The key point in the Parmenides is that the argument of the Parmenides is premised on an early exclusion, very early on in the Parmenides dialogue. The Parmenides is divided basically into two parts: an introductory part where there's a discussion and a kind of setup of the battle that's about to occur, the massacre, the meat grinder that's about to occur, which rapidly includes the reader. You feel like you've gone through a meat grinder on this thing, and that's exactly what happens. Plato takes you through a meat grinder. But the setup on the thing, which is very brief, it's 5 or 6 pages, and then the meat grinder is the final 30 or 40 pages. But in the setup of the thing, you have your 4 principal characters, who are Parmenides, Zenon, Socrates, and Aristotle. And they're basically discussing, well, let's have a chat, let's discuss method, and so on and so forth. And early on in that discussion, what happens is that Plato has, the 4 of them, discuss things in such a fashion that Socrates finally says, okay, we're going to exclude change from consideration. We're going to exclude change. And then once that happens, what you're left with is a tragedy. You're left with a meat grinder. And this is exactly the kind of thing, as Lynn has described this in some of his recent writings, this is exactly what Don Quixote is, Cervantes is Don Quixote. This is exactly like Hamlet. The point here is, if you make a fundamental axiomatic mistake from the outset, what is the necessary tragic consequence of that unless you change those fundamental axioms? And the point at which that mistake is made or deliberately introduced by the playwright or the dialogue writer, in this case Plato, that is the point of the punctum saliens. That is the point after which there is no stopping the tragedy unless you alter the axioms altogether. So that's the way the whole thing is actually set up. Parmenides' line, his spiel, Parmenides' approach in this whole thing is he says reality, truth, reality is the one, the unitary, the one, the totality. Right? Zenon says, he's with Parmenides, he basically has the same point of view. He's younger, but he's got the same point of view. He says reality is not the many, the multiple, the many different things. Okay? Now that may sound like they're saying the same thing, and in one way they are, but in another way they're not. Socrates says, no, the reality lies in the forms. And here we run into a very big translation problem from the Greek, and we'll get into this a little bit more. What he means by forms, it's sometimes translated as ideas, or what I found to be a very useful translation. Again, I don't know Greek, so I don't know how loyal this is to the original. But one guy that I read translates this as archetype. The idea of a form is an archetype, arquetipo in Spanish. Right? And Socrates says, no, this is the solution to the problem. And so they start talking about all of this. And what happens at the very beginning is that Parmenides goes after Socrates. Aristotle's role in this whole thing, by the way, is that he's the one who asks the stupid questions. Right? This is very deliberate. Because this is a mocking of the Aristotelian method. So what happens is they start going after Socrates, and Parmenides says, well, look, but the problem is that if you say that the truth lies in the forms or the ideas or the archetypes behind things or related to things, you're going to run into a very big problem, because then what you need is a specific form to explain each class of different things that you've got. You need it, and he says it this way. This is Parmenides. I think I know why you, speaking to Socrates, why you imagine these unitary forms exist. When you have decided that a number of individual things are large, you probably cast your eye over the lot of them, notice that they present one and the same distinctive character or pattern, and accordingly pronounce the large to be one thing. Socrates says, quite right. Not bad for a jerk. Quite right. Parmenides says, but now take the form largeness and particular large things. When you cast your minds over them in the same way, large things and the concept largeness, when you cast your mind's eye over them in the same way, surely you must likewise conceive the notion of a single large something by virtue of which they all seem large. Socrates says, granted. And Parmenides says, aha, so here we have another form of largeness, distinct both from largeness itself, the first largeness, and from all things which partake thereof. And yet another by virtue of which all these will be large, so that none of your forms will any longer be one, but an indefinite plurality. Okay, you see what he's done? Got a lot of specific items, the many. In this case, let's say they're all large. That's the characteristic that they have. That's their quality. So the form, says Parmenides, that Socrates or Plato is looking for, is the quality of largeness which they all share. Okay, so you have your quality of largeness and all these large specific things. And Parmenides says, aha, but once you do that, how about if you have your mind think about all the specific things which are large, your new form of largeness, and look at all of that together, and you've got a new form above it all, which encompasses all of that, and so on ad infinitum. He doesn't continue with the thing, but he says, so you have an indefinite